3 years ago, this man was in charge of disaster preparation and relief for Hurricane Katrina, with, to some degree, his hands tied behind his back by various governmental agencies. He was criticized for the failures that led to the catastrophe there, and probably to some great degree, including in these quarters, unfairly so. Tonight, Michael Brown joins me here in New York. Thank you for your time, sir.
My pleasure, Keith.
Before we talk about anything that relates to you, you know enough about this stuff to know when it's going well and when it's going poorly. I assume it's going well. Why is it going well?
It is going well right now, and I'll tell you why. There's a couple of things happening. Decisions made prior to this hurricane making landfall. The decision to evacuate the city, and most people forget this, the decision not to have a shelter of last resort. If you saw, I think it was Governor Jindal earlier today talking about trying to send urban search and rescue teams out, but they couldn't yet because of the high winds. If you hadn't done the evacuation and you had done a shelter of last resort, what would be going on? It would be firefighters and rescue people fighting high winds trying to get people off rooftops like we did 3 years ago.
Goodness. So obviously preparation is the key in all these circumstances. To what degree do you think, by how much did we miss something like Katrina?
In this particular storm, 50%. 50%. Because what happened is there was just enough that the eye wall began to collapse, fairly rapidly. And I think that mitigated the storm surge. And it was the storm surge that really killed us in Hurricane Katrina, because as it came up and started to top the levees, that started the breaching of the levees. It was the storm surge both northward up through the wetlands and the bayous, and the storm surge off Lake Pontchartrain.
What needs to be done? Has there been any evidence of disasters missed in the last 24 hours that really were just stopgap measures that worked, that would not last through another storm like this?
A few people within FEMA have told me that yes, but that's true in every disaster. You fly by the seat of your pants in almost any instance. But what concerns me most is, it's almost 7 years after 9/11. We haven't fixed interoperability. We haven't fixed communications. While they worked in this disaster, they worked primarily because it was a confined area. It didn't cover 90,000 square miles like Katrina.
So if you were to have the proverbial unlimited budget to do and the authority to do, and untangling all the red tape at both the national and the state and the city level, if you were to do it, would you focus first on communications and relief and workers and people on the ground and police and fire and all that, or would you go and say, look at what they did in Holland, we're going to invest umpteen $1 billion and make the damnedest out in the sea protective walls you've ever imagined?
Keith, we have to do both. If we don't do both, we're doomed to failure again. Because if we don't make certain that state and local governments, not just in Louisiana, but in all 50 states, if we don't make certain that the firefighters, the cops, the rescue workers have the money and the tools they need to do their job, if we don't put money into planning for different scenarios for catastrophic events, and if we don't rebuild these levees the way we're supposed to, we're doomed to fail again.
When this happens, when you see any kind of imminent disaster threaten, what does it feel like for you personally, given what happened to you in 2005?
Pit in the stomach. It is. I think people need to understand that when these things start to occur, the adrenaline starts to flow. You want to do everything you can possibly and humanly do. And the biggest frustration for me during Hurricane Katrina was, as I would push the knobs and spin the wheels and pull the levers, nothing was happening. It's like the ground was pulled out from underneath me and all these systems broke down. And then the media began to focus solely on, let's blame this guy. And then you had the president sitting up in the White House saying, well, thank God the media is attacking me, or attacking Brown and not me or Chertoff. So it was just this calamity.
You may have noticed at that time I had suggested that Mr. Chertoff possibly bore some of the responsibility of more than anybody else, since he did identify Louisiana as a city rather than as a state, and everybody was working on low sleep, and people do make mistakes at all occasions. But did the administration, and I mean this generically, not politically, just the same people who are there now who were there then, did they get something scared out of them to behave in the way they needed to behave in this occasion?
You can go back, and I know somewhere in the archives of NBC and MSNBC, you're going to find clips of me where they say, what happens if the next Hurricane Katrina comes? And my comment has always been this: they're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at it.
Fortunately, this has not apparently been required.
Right.
What happens, though, when Hannah comes up now more towards the east Thursday night? What do we do then?
Well, we did that in 2004 in Florida. 4 hurricanes back-to-back, handled them successfully. And let me tell you the difference. Tom Ridge, Secretary Ridge, knew that FEMA could do its job if nobody interfered with them. And at that time, we hadn't had budget cuts, personnel cuts, or anything else. So the Secretary Ridge was smart enough to stay out of that and basically call me about once every 48 hours and say, what do you need? You can't have micromanage a disaster by Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. You have to manage that in the field.
You have to have the authority rather than having somebody call up every once in a while, right? The only time you would hear from them was something comparatively trivial, and then you wouldn't hear from them again for hours at a time?
Well, not only that, Keith, but let me tell you this. There was a point where, and I was so dumbfounded, this happens, and you're just like, I can't believe this was done or said. Mm-hmm. I was on a G5 going from Biloxi back to Baton Rouge, and Secretary Chertoff said, I'm having a hard time reaching you. Stay in Baton Rouge. Run this from your desk.
Says it all. Michael Brown, the former head of FEMA, and inexorably and I guess always, if we're good or for ill, tied to what happened 3 years ago. I'm glad to see that some of what you suggested needed to be done has been done, and we may have this time actually dodged the bullet. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Thank you, Keith.
Pleasure.